This video is for 3 different groups of people: photographers, day hikers, and of course, those looking to visit Vancouver or the Whistler area. I just got back from a week-long trip in Vancouver and thought I'd share with you some of the things I learned from both a photography and hiking perspective. For me, it's always a happy balance of trying to get the most out of any trip you go on. We made this trip from October 17th to the 25th, so that was about a week's worth of time. And one of the things I didn't realize up front is that is prime time for bear hibernation season. Now, fortunately, most of the hikes that I went on were heavily trafficked, so there wasn't really a fear of running into bears, but I did have to purchase bear spray and walked around with a bear bell just to be safe. Coming from Ontario, one of the things that you don't realize is that Ontario is very flat. So when you read what time sunset is at, it's pretty much at that time. When you're anywhere that has mountains, you got to account for the fact that the mountain affects the sunset time. So typically what I would do is if sunset was at 7, you would actually consider it to be at 6 so that you can account for both the forest and the mountains blocking out the sun a lot more earlier than what you're used to. Another consideration, especially for BC, is the time of year that you go. I mentioned bears, but also a lot of the hikes that I had looked at beforehand relied on gondola access to get actually to where the hikes begin. One of the most famous hikes, of course, being the Grouse Grind, which is right outside of Vancouver. They actually closed their gondola, I think around the 18th of October, to get it ready for snow and do maintenance until about the beginning of November. And then there's Whistler, which has a whole bunch of hikes around the top of the mountains, and what they have to do is they close all the gondolas so that they can again do maintenance and prepare for the ski season. One of the hikes that we wanted to do was around the top of the Whistler Mountains, and unfortunately all the gondolas were closed, so there's no actual way to get to the top of the mountain. I have to stop because there's a fish over here. Oh, there it goes. I think it's time of the year for the salmon to migrate. So going to Vancouver in mid to end October, the one thing you really struggle with is the weather. It's not quite the nice summery weather that you had a few weeks before, and it's not quite cold enough that the rain that's coming down is turning into snow on the mountains. When we went on our hikes, what that looked like was not only a lot of clouds, but a lot of fog running through the forest. And from a photography perspective, that can actually be very interesting. What it ends up creating is a lot of depth in your photos. Without the fog, you would just have a plain looking forest. Here in Ontario, we don't get that rolling fog through our forests because we don't have the elevation. But in BC, of course, you have that elevation, so you get the fog, you get the clouds, and especially at that time of year, you do get some of the trees changing towards a yellow. I don't think Vancouver quite compares to what we have here in Algonquin Park, where we have a lot of red colors. There, all they get are little patches of yellow, but they don't really get too much red. Of course, they have the evergreen trees and they have some yellow, which I still feel makes for some really interesting photos. Most of the days that we went for a hike, there was a threat of rain. I think in total, out of the whole week, we had 3 days where it was either clear or cloudy. There was always still some threat of rain, but thankfully we did our longer hikes on the days that it looked a little bit nicer. I actually ended up doing one hike, which was Garibaldi Lakes, which was a 20-kilometer day. And when we got to the lake, it was about 0 or 1 degrees and it was raining. It was a very cold rain, not something that I would recommend for a casual day hiker. So circling back a bit, I'm always trying to find a happy balance between not doing a hike that is too long and doing one that's a little bit longer than what your casual day hikers would do. Coming from flat Ontario, the biggest challenge that I had was actually the elevation gain. I would look at some hikes and it would be 3 or 5 kilometers and I would think, oh, like that's easy. I can do that in an hour or 2 hours. But the thing that you don't realize is that those 5-kilometer hikes have a half a kilometer to a kilometer of elevation gain, which means you're not going to be going at the same pace of hiking that you would in Ontario that you would be doing there in Vancouver and BC. The most useful tool I found when trying to determine if a hike was going to be too hard or too easy was actually All Trails. It's a popular app that you can download for your phone, and it gives you pretty much all of the information you need to know. It tells you how long the trail is, and it also gives you an elevation profile so you can see how quickly the hike gets steep. Also, a lot of people who hike those trails regularly leave reviews, and you can actually figure out what the trail conditions are based on their reviews. And so you can take all of that and factor it in to determine what type of gear you need to bring with you. Two more considerations when it comes to photography gear. I obviously love bringing as much gear as I can, but you really have to factor in what type of hikes you're doing. Because I'm there for a week and I'm trying to optimize my time, I'm not going to be doing overnight backpacking where I have to hike for a day, I'll wake up, get one photo, and then pack all that up and hike out. So I'm going to be looking to do more so day hikes, things that I can do in half a day, maybe 2-3 hours in, 2 hours out. That's something that's going to be achievable and not leave me extremely fatigued for the next day. On the topic of lenses, one of the things that I think is an absolute must is a telephoto lens. You would think, oh, I'm shooting landscapes, I need to bring my wide-angle lens so I can capture everything, but a lot of the times the mountains and the trees and the things that you want to capture are actually far away, and one of the best techniques you have at your disposal is having that telephoto lens so that you can take everything, compress it down, or really reach out and grab a photo of the peak of a mountain. Of course, for me, like, my telephoto lens weighs about 2 pounds, and that means, you know, I'm trying to shove as much stuff into this pack as I can, which means I'm hiking with at least 15 to 20 pounds of gear when you factor in everything else I'm bringing with you. And stay tuned because I'm gonna go through my gear list in just a second. The final consideration when it comes to photography gear is drones. Now, of course, I have my drone, I love using it, but just like here in Ontario, in BC, you're not supposed to fly drones in their provincial parks. Now, I did bring my drone with me because I knew I was gonna be in areas where I would be able to fly a drone, and so I ended up getting some amazing drone footage, just not necessarily in the park. That's a good thing because that means I don't have to hike with my drone, which adds even more pounds of gear and even more weight that I'd have to carry. Now to talk about some of the hikes that we did, some of the ones I planned that we didn't do, and give you my recommendations of if you're going to Vancouver, what hikes I think are best for you. Of course, for everyone, this is going to be different because not everyone wants to do a 20-kilometer hike. Some people really like those roadside stops, but of course, remember that it's a balance between competing with other people to have that, you know, private photography view versus something that's a little bit longer. You're gonna get more unique photos. So this is the hike list that we looked at. Some of them we did and some of them we didn't do. The most popular, Grouse Grind, we didn't end up doing that one. The day we went, the Metro Vancouver Transit Authority actually closed the gondola. What we were gonna do is we were gonna hike to the top and then take the gondola down, and because they closed it, it kind of closes the trail. Now this ended up being a good thing because from the reviews that I read, the Grouse Grind doesn't really have a good effort to photo reward ratio. It's got an extremely steep elevation climb, and the whole thing is basically just stairs with no views other than at the top. Now, if you know anything about Vancouver, West Vancouver actually has a lot of hikes which are really in close proximity to downtown Vancouver. Getting to West Vancouver is actually very accessible, and there are a lot of day hikes that you can do in that area. We did White Lake, which is right inside of West Vancouver. It's a nice one. There's a little lake at the top with a little dock. If you're going in summer, apparently a lot of people actually go swimming. We went on a rainy day, so a lot of the photos we got were very moody. It's kind of a easy to moderate hike in terms of the rating scale. The second one was Cypress. Cypress is kind of a ski mountain thing that you can drive up the road. There are some lookouts on the way which offer some decent views of downtown Vancouver. At the top, there's also some lookout trails, but just because of time, we didn't end up going all the way up. But if you want to do some hikes and don't want to have to travel super far, that's one I'd recommend. Halfway through our trip, we ended up going north to Whistler. We ended up spending about half of our time in Whistler, in and around that area, and doing things even north of Whistler. Narren Falls is one that we did that's kind of a 2-kilometer in and back hike. There's a falls, and there's actually quite some good mountain peaks that you can see while you're walking along the river. In the same area, 1 Mile Lake, there's this little lake that sits just south of Pemberton. It has a boardwalk that goes around it, a dock, you can go swimming. There were some people paddle boarding while we were there, even though it was cold, and some of the views that you get of the mountain are just great. Kind of northeast of Pemberton is Joffrey Lakes. Now this is probably one of the most heavily trafficked, popular hikes that you can do in that area. It is rated as a moderate hike. The first lake is very easy to get to, and then after that it does get a little bit steep with some rocky portions. I'd say as long as you're not an old grandma who needs a walker, you're probably okay to do it. We saw everyone ranging from, you know, full day overnight campers to people doing it in running shoes. I would say if you're going at the time of year we did, maybe bring some slightly nicer footwear so that you're not risking damaging your feet or tripping. It is very windy at the top. We actually experienced some snow on the day we went. In total, with photography stops, that was about 2.5 hours. From my perspective, I think that's a hike that is totally worth doing, and the views itself rival things that are in Alberta, such as Lake Louise and Moraine Lake, because the lakes have that same very blue, rich, silty texture to them. It makes for some really awesome photos. Now, the hardest hike we did by far in the time that we were in Vancouver and BC was the Sea to Summit Trail. And this is just outside of the Squamish area, North Vancouver. As you're on your way to Whistler, you can see it, you can't miss it. There's a big, tall, green gondola that goes up the side of the mountain. Now, we decided to actually hike this trail. I think it was about 7 or 8 kilometers, and it doesn't seem so bad, but it's very steep and has some up and down sections. It has some ropes and some chains. I think even a ladder and some logs that you need to climb. If you're doing it with weight, it's gonna be hard. Again, I was carrying about 20 pounds. I'm in decent shape. I went with my sisters. They didn't carry as much, but I think they all agreed that that was the hardest hike we did. Now, the benefit, of course, is when you get to the top, you can take the gondola back down, and we did it just at the perfect time. I think we did it at around 5 p.m. The views that we were getting on the way down were basically sunset views. So again, going back to the fact that the sun sets earlier than what it actually sets at because of the mountains. I think the sun officially set just past 6 o'clock. We were going down at 5 o'clock, and the sunlight and the clouds and everything just lined up so perfectly, making for some amazing views. The longest hike that we did during the time that we were there was Garibaldi Lake. We actually did it a little bit different than you would if you were just to go to the lake itself. We hiked through the Taylor Meadows area, which is, I guess it's technically closed at that time of year for bear activities. There are some pretty scary signs on your way up that say bears in the area, and for good reason. You're actually walking through a blueberry fields, and the bears do kind of go through that area. There are camping spots that you can book. No one was there when we were there. We made it to the base of the Black Tusk Trail, at which point we started to get into snow. I didn't have snowshoes with me. I had crampons. We did experience a little bit of snow, a little bit of rain. I think that day in total was about 20 kilometers, maybe 21 kilometers. Some of the best views. Unfortunately, it was overcast and rainy, so I couldn't see the peaks of the mountains. But in terms of some of the photos that I got, even at Taylor Meadows, at the ranger station, just some epic, phenomenal views. And I think if I'm going back to see Black Tusk and the Meadows is absolutely something I have to do in spring when all the flowers are in bloom, because some of the photos I've seen online just look beautiful. Finally, my biggest disappointment of this trip, which I mentioned at the beginning, and the one mistake we made, was going at the time of the year that we did. The Whistler gondolas were closed. What you do is you take the Whistler gondola to the top, and then you take the chairlift, which takes you to the very peak, and then you can hike down and you get basically panorama views as you walk around the mountain. They're basically the views that you get if you were to go skiing in Whistler, but of course, because you're hiking, you can take your time and really enjoy the scenery and take it all in and get some amazing photos. Now, I think that's it for the majority of what I wanted to cover about my Vancouver, BC experience. I was gonna go through what I packed, but I actually found when we were doing the Sea to Summit Trail, they have a sign that's posted that lists all the recommended gear you should bring. Now, it is for more of an alpine season when there's snow, because there's things like avalanche shovels on there. When we were in the Vancouver area, one of the things that you hear constantly are helicopters going over. And you think, oh, that's nice. People are going for helicopter tours of the mountains. And that's actually not the case. What it is the North Shore rescue helicopters. You don't want to be that person. You don't want to end up with an expensive bill because you weren't prepared climbing a mountain. At the end of the day, you need to find a happy balance between all of these things, between how much gear you're bringing with you and how long of a hike you're comfortable doing. If you're doing a trail that's heavily trafficked, then you don't need to bring as much gear because there's going to be other people on the trail and you don't need to worry. But if you're doing a moderate to hard hike in bear country and there's not going to be as many people, you need all of that extra safety equipment so that you don't have to be rescued by a helicopter. Anyways, that's it from me. I thoroughly enjoyed my Vancouver trip and hope that you enjoyed some of the footage from it. I'll be posting a ton of photos from this trip on Instagram and probably doing a little bit of behind the scenes editing of those photos. So if you want to see any of that content, make sure you follow me on Instagram and you're subscribed here on YouTube. If you found this video helpful in any way, go ahead and hit the thumbs up and tell YouTube that you felt that this video was worth watching so that it recommends it to other people. And until next time, take care. On one end of the spectrum, the other thing to consider